A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 37. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
You ready to talk about Star Wars on this fantastic 3rd of March?
I am. It's a beautiful day outside here.
It's pretty nice here, actually.
Weather's fantastic.
Winter is pretty...
Ready to talk all about the tale of the Jedi Temple.
Well, yes, we're gonna get to we have a lot of Star Wars. Yeah, if this is the first time you've ever listened to us, which I can't believe it is, we are a Star Wars podcast, but we talk about Star Wars mostly. But I actually kind of want to, before we get into the Star Wars, I want to talk about something that dropped, as the kids say today, which was the first trailer, and I don't think it was considered a teaser. I think it was a full trailer of Paul Feig. Is it pronounced Feig?
I thought it's Feig.
Paul Feig. We'll say Paul Feig. Paul Feig's Ghostbusters reboot.
Yeah,
and I think everybody knows the pedigree of it. So we've got all new cast. It is a reboot, or is that what it? Yeah, if it's a reboot,
I guess. Yeah,
it bears no direct connection to the previous two Ghostbusters films, other than, the idea.
I guess the trailer opens with 30 years ago, 4 scientists.
That's kind of a weird. To me, that's the one thing that kind of made me go, "Hey, wait a second! If you guys are trying to set yourself apart,
right?" And also, Winston was not a scientist.
Well, he's been retconned,
right? He was like they were 3 scientists and a guy who needed a job.
Exactly. He was a cab driver. He'd do anything. I'll believe in any of that stuff as long as there's a steady paycheck in it. Did you ever hear that story that, I think it was John Michael Straczynski, the television writer, told, because he wrote a bunch on the Ghostbusters cartoon about...
I don't know what story you're referring to.
No,
I haven't heard it.
So this might be apocryphal, but people might want to do a little research, and if I'm characterizing this wrong, I apologize ahead of time. But he always told this story that when they rebooted it for the cartoon, that they wanted to make Winston Zeddemore the quote driver. That they were gonna he wasn't even gonna have a proton pack or something.
Ooh,
it was it came from down up on high, and it's luckily I never watched that cartoon.
I did.
I think that he was a full partner, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I loved it when I was a kid, and then some years ago, I got the 2-disc set Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, because I am of the very controversial opinion that Ghostbusters 2 is one of the better sequels ever made. But so it comes with, I don't know, 2 or 3 episodes of that cartoon. And so I watched them and they're so boring. And I don't know if it's just the episodes that they included, but they're interminable. So
yeah,
I love that show as a kid, and looking back now, I was like, wow, this is not even exciting. Nothing happens.
Yeah,
what was the show?
I can't remember what year that those were. It's got to be maybe late 80s, early 90s.
I'll say 89, 90 maybe.
Yeah, so that was kind of past my interest in cartoons. But I do remember watching it occasionally. I mean, as far as my thing, it's like my thing about Ghostbusters. It was really the first movie was my big thing. I mean, I love that movie. I think I saw it like 3 times in the theater. And I had, there wasn't a lot of memorabilia out. So, I mean, I had like stickers, which was basically the most you could. I mean, all the little proton pack and outfits and stuff came out later.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I will be controversial to your controversial opinion and say that Ghostbusters 2 actually has the honor of being the only film I ever walked out of. It was like, that was kind of, I think when it came out.
I understand.
It came out in 89.
It's not great, but it's definitely better than it could have been.
And I haven't really revisited. I own it on Blu-ray because we bought the set because my wife loves the second one. She's actually her favorite. But I just haven't.
Well, that I don't go that far, but yeah.
I haven't really spent time with it, but yeah, it's one of those things I keep thinking about. And it was at for clarity, it wasn't like a thing where I got up and said, "I'm not taking any more of this shit," and I walked out the door. It was like I was in high school. We were at the drive-in and with some buddies, and the one guy was like, "I'm not really feeling this. I just want to go. Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And because I wasn't feeling it, it was like that. It wasn't like I didn't go, "Dear Mr. So-and-so, I am quite disappointed in this second film." But having been a huge, being 11 years old when that first one came out,
yeah,
it was pretty important to me. So maybe by the time the second one came out, I was over it or something. But
yeah.
That being said, what's your take on this new trailer? I mean, we're only getting 2 minutes of it.
Oh boy, I think Kate McKinnon's going to be great in it, as she is in just about everything. And then beyond that, oh boy, I don't know. And I don't want to be like a purist about Ghostbusters because it's Ghostbusters, right? But right. So you have now Kristen Wiig's character is like one of the best nuclear physicists in the world, or something.
Exactly.
And you have, certainly the technology, the effects are a lot more advanced, but like the technology is like, but it looks like a dark, gritty reboot of Ghostbusters, like to the extent that that's possible. And I don't get it, right? Because like the thing about the Ghostbusters is like they were frauds essentially.
Exactly, that's my notes.
I mean, Egon was like a real scientist. Like, I mean, they were all scientists.
Kind of not, though. It was kind of.
But they were like, right? They were paranormal scientists, which is, come on, right? But so then to turn that around and turn them into, and I understand too, right? Like if you're gonna, you kind of can't, if you're gonna do all women Ghostbusters, which I think is fine, but if you're gonna do that, then it's almost like you can't make them frauds and shams, because then you're sort of saying like, oh well, look at these women, like they're not real scientists. They're sort of downplaying the role of women in science and everything. They're like, oh look, they're just frauds. What about other women in science? Maybe they're frauds. That you don't want to send that message. But it's I don't really know what the purpose is of like making Kristen Wiig like an actual real nuclear physicist. I mean, it overall it seemed to me, and of course the trailer, they can cut a trailer any way they want. And I guess she's the biggest name. But it looks like Paul Feig made another Melissa McCarthy movie because he was behind Spy and The Heat and
Bridesmaids,
other stuff, right? He likes working with Melissa McCarthy, which fine, great. I liked Spy, sure. I like Bridesmaids, fine. I never saw The Heat, but I've heard it's good. Right, but basically he was like, "Oh, I want to make another Melissa McCarthy movie." And there's this like Ghostbusters idea floating around. I'll just combine the two, and I'll make a Melissa McCarthy movie, disguised as an ensemble comedy. But really, it's just going to be a Melissa McCarthy movie. Which, I mean, to the extent that, I mean, I guess so. I guess she's in the Bill Murray role, and to the extent that like Bill Murray basically owns the Ghostbusters movies, he still falls back occasionally. And I mean, he's like directing traffic among all the things, and he's in charge of the movie, really. Venkman is like in charge of everything at all times, but it's still like, you still consider it Ghostbusters. You don't consider it like a Bill Murray movie,
right?
Necessarily. So I'm skeptical. I don't know. I don't know. I just, that's my reaction. Is like, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It kind of made me realize at the end of the day that 30 years post, how little I'm invested in the Ghostbusters as a franchise. I wasn't like I wasn't like groaning, but I was kind of underwhelmed. I mean, I'm big on that. I love the idea in the first movie that the characters were pseudoscientists, and where other, when is a better time right now to kind of address that kind of stuff again with, between Ancient Aliens on TV and the History Channel becoming, gone from being, the Hitler Channel to the, the Oak Island, or, were there actually giants living in Virginia in the,
Here's what I don't want in this movie, and that I'm pretty sure we're going to get. What I don't want is a Neil deGrasse Tyson cameo.
Exactly.
And like, I'm almost positive now. I never thought about this before. Now I'm almost positive that we're going to get one. Right? Like, I don't want the like some character to make some statement about like investment in STEM fields or whatever. Right? Like, it's Ghostbusters. Just like, have fun with it. And why does it have to be Ghostbusters? And I don't mean that in like, no, women can't be Ghostbusters. I mean that in like, create another like science-y action comedy with women in it, and then like create a new franchise to continue on and for people to get excited about. Because just calling it Ghostbusters invites these comparisons and invites all this other junk that comes along with it. Just create a new one.
Yeah.
Just call it something else. They don't have to fight ghosts. They can fight something else. Aliens. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, again, my whole reaction is just like, I don't know.
I mean, I guess at the end, I was my number one problem, and the more I say it, the more I kind of like, I roll my eyes at myself, is that I really wish it tied into the original. I have no problem with the casting. I mean, you got to cast comics. You have to have comics in it. The only casting issue I have is if they're going to do what was Annie Potts' character's name? Oh, jeez. I'm blanking.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's Annie Potts.
Annie Potts. We all know she's the one.
Oh, Jeanette.
Jeanette. That's right. Honestly,
Janine.
Duh. Sorry about the bug eyes thing, Janine. Honestly, did they put what's his face, that Australian dude, that piece of Maine candy, the Hemsworth? I don't know. Yeah, Chris Hemsworth is basically, I think he's playing the secretary in this, and I can't think of anybody who would have been better suited for that role than the Janine type character would be Hannibal Buress. But hey, I think it would have that kind of dry kind of idea, but maybe they're going for something different. It's not a remake of Ghostbusters. I don't think they're gonna be doing it's got a different problem or whatever. Like I said, comes out in July. How many months is that? I mean, it's 5 months from now. 4 months. Well, too late for them to refilm anything. Yeah. But
I mean, the one casting issue I think is Leslie Jones, right? And I thought this when I watched it. Other people have mentioned it on Twitter too, right? Like the fact that Leslie Jones, all right, if you're going to be ahistorical and call the original Ghostbusters all scientists, which they weren't, we've discussed, but all right, fine. So 4 scientists, but now you make Leslie Jones the one non-scientist character. Like it would have been really easy. So Leslie Jones in this movie, the other 3 are scientists, I guess. Leslie Jones is like a subway worker, like she works at a subway kiosk or something, and she joins up with them because she knows New York. She's got the street smarts. They've got the book smarts, and she's got the street smarts, and she's gonna she's a straight talker and she's going to speak her mind or whatever. Right? It would have been so easy for them to switch her and Melissa McCarthy. Like, it would have been totally easy for Melissa McCarthy to play the like kiosk worker who then joins up and helps out and still has all the wisecracks and still thinks she's the leader and does all of those other things they did with her character. But like, you could make Leslie Jones the scientist if you want. Like, you are allowed to do that. And it just reinforced the idea to me that I don't even think it was like a conscious or even a subconscious thing related to like, oh, well, of course Leslie Jones won't play the scientist, right? She'll play the real person or whatever. But I think it's, again, related to the idea of Paul Feig was like, no, I want to make a Melissa McCarthy movie. Oh, so of course she has to be one of the scientists.
So yeah, it becomes
right, like that, because then if she's not, then she doesn't show up until 20 minutes into the movie or whatever. But we want her front and center, so of course she has to be one of the scientists, and Kristen Wiig obviously has to be one of the scientists, and then Kate McKinnon, she'll be the whatever, she's around too, and she so I think it was probably spawned more that way. But it's like, why? Well, yeah, it's unfortunate, and the way other people are reacting to it, to the criticism of it.
Yeah, I've been hearing
criticized
a lot of static about this.
Other people are reacting to the criticism. I think also speaks to the fact that like, no, there's real thought behind this criticism. This isn't just like a knee jerk. We want to criticize you just for the sake of it because we don't like women or we don't like the idea of a new Ghostbusters movie. It's like, no, there's a reason you had to make Leslie Jones the one non-scientist and like the street smart lady who's going to speak her mind. Yeah. So that, I think the fact that it turned out that way, I think is unfortunate, and it was avoidable. Like, it was easily avoidable. But again, for the fact that I think this started out less as like, oh, I want to make an ensemble comedy, and more like, all right, what can I do with Melissa McCarthy and put her front and center?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that she seems to be his muse right now, and I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure she's pretty much involved in the scripting of everything she works on. I mean, am I wrong in that she's a writer?
No, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think it's a partnership, and it's it's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to get into the big conversation because I just feel like I'm probably the wrong person to talk about it, but it's like this kind of, representation is the big talk in Hollywood, about 50 years too late. It becomes this thing where it's like, well, I knew that somebody was going to find something to kind of, ding on it. That being said, I don't know if I don't think it's necessarily an unfair criticism, like what you're saying. It's kind of like, and now movies come out, and it's like, are we excited about this movie, or does it have these problems? And I mean, at the end of the day, it's a trailer. We could be a completely different, look at Star Wars. Look at how the story was presented, the way and then what a different story it really was post the trailer. I mean, they explicitly show that Leslie is works as an MTA person or whatever.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, I think for me to underscore is just, the contrast with the way Star Wars is handling things now, and the way that they did The Force Awakens, and they're doing Rogue One, I guess, and everything going forward is, I'm not going to say that Star Wars and Disney got like absolutely everything right. In terms of like casting and, different rules people are playing, but, they're at least working on it, and they're trying to find ways to sort of move things forward a little bit and find roles that, certain types of actors wouldn't normally have played. And so now they're playing them. And, they're open and they're receptive to like people say like, oh, hey, this is really cool. Or, oh, hey, maybe you want to think about this. Whereas other people are reacting, they're like getting their backs up at people saying like, hey, maybe Leslie Jones could have been a scientist. And they're like, whoa, no, I don't, you just don't like women. There's a right and a wrong way to like react to some of this criticism too. So I think it does, like I said, underscore that, and this is also the last week, J.J. Abrams has talked about how, he wants to see more gay characters in Star Wars, and I'm sure that will happen. I mean, it's already happening in the books. So I'm sure the movies won't be that far behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
so yeah, it's sort of like, okay, well, I'm glad that like Star Wars isn't running into a lot of these same problems, at least at the moment. I mean, who knows? By the time they get to Episode 9 could like they killed off all of the non-white people, and now it's just all the white people again. You know, who knows?
Right.
At least for the moment, it seems like Disney and Star Wars are like trying. They're actually putting some thought into it, and they're actually trying to say like, all right, let's find roles for these actors who might not otherwise be in these roles.
Yeah, and I guess at the end of the day, what I take away from this, and that actually makes me feel good, is that this is a conversation that's happening. At least, you know what I mean? It's not a thing where a very small group of people have a problem, and then somebody tells them to shut up, and it becomes nothing.
Right, that these studios and the creators of these things like actually have to respond to it. They actually have to like come up with a reason why, like, Leslie Jones isn't a scientist, or why is this all white people, or you know, something like that.
Yeah, and is any time when a movie is being made, and in my opinion, it would always be better in the script stage if these things were addressed. That, you know, one of the number one things that bugs me about movies in this day and age, it seems that like there's not a lot of logic to stuff. You know, it feels like logic is always kind of like thrown out the window for the ease of story. And maybe with these kind of situations, the logic of characters' motivations and the logic of, you know, who gets the agency and who doesn't, at least if these conversations take place, maybe we're moving in the right direction. But who knows? I mean, these things ebb and flow, where it's like, you know, I remember, what year was it that the Oscars, they called it the year of the woman, you know?
Oh,
and it was like, that was like 20 years ago. And
yeah,
and
there was the same thing in Congress too. There was like a year of the woman, and because like 5 women got elected.
Yeah, you can still make an argument that really it's like that there's still these issues where, you know, they've been slowly rectified, but and again with the, you know, the Oscars, the controversy of the Oscars, where it's like kind of the ebb and flow, where one year there's, you know, nominees of color, and then the next year there isn't, and then is that because people are backtracking, or is it just because of this? And I mean, I have no answers. Don't get me. I haven't spent enough time thinking about it. But it does kind of show you that this is still an evolving industry. It's, you know, Hollywood still has a lot to learn, and even after you know, a century of it. But, you know, I'm probably going to go see Ghostbusters because I'll probably want to see something funny. And out of everything that's coming out, I'm a lot more excited about Ghostbusters than I am about this new Superman versus Batman thing that I have no great
BVS.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to get it. I don't want to waste any time talking about that, other than to say I have never been so unexcited about a major franchise superhero film. I mean, I liked the Christian Bale Batmans a lot. I even liked Man of Steel more than a lot of people, but it just, this whole like, let's throw as many characters at the wall and see how it sticks. And they're wasting an entire movie on Batman and Superman not being friends when we all know that they're going to end up being super friends. You know, it's like, to me, it's like a little bit of, you know.
Right.
I guess I don't have a greater point, but I guess, like I said, I'm more excited about Ghostbusters. I like Leslie Jones a lot, actually. She's probably one of my favorite SNL people.
Yeah. It's basically Kate McKinnon and her at this point.
Yeah, I like Kate McKinnon. I was talking to a mutual friend.
Saoirse Zameta's okay too.
Yeah, not a huge fan of Kristen Wiig, as you know, but hey, I
feel like they don't give her. So this is not talking wig, but I mean, I feel like she doesn't get enough to do in all of these movies that she's in.
Yeah,
like she's in like this straight role. She plays like the normal person, and she just doesn't have anything interesting to do.
Yeah, I know. I know, and I keep thinking about her, and I keep going back to the Martian, which is the biggest thing she's been in recently, and she really didn't have a lot to do, so I shouldn't really be picking on her. But there's when you come from a comedy background like her, and she's a lot of her stuff is slapstick. It's hard to have her be serious in a movie and not expect her to like look at the camera and go, I farted, that kind of.
Well, especially because that's like SNL these days is like, all right, now everyone like now make a face to the camera.
Yeah, it's kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, The Martian's a terrible example because very few people, even Matt Damon, doesn't have a lot to do in that movie. I've kind of gone from being like, yeah, I saw The Martian is pretty good to being I'm starting to think I might hate The Martian. So, I know you guys were all worried my feelings about The Martian.
Talking Marsh.
I know we are so
talking Mars.
I feel like we're in the weeds now. So let's bring it back to Star Wars.
Speaking of movies, that's what we're talking film. The Force Awakens shut out at the Oscars, the 117th Oscar. No, I don't know what it is.
Yes.
Whatever the most recent Oscars were, they got shut out. They were nominated in like 7 categories, I want to say. They didn't win a single one. Mostly the films that won ahead of Star Wars, Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Mad Max Fury Road, which won a bunch of stuff. Ex Machina won for visual effects. And in the score category, John Williams, this was his 50th Oscar nomination. But it went to Ennio Morricone, this was his first win.
Yes.
And so, it was kind of like, in that sense, I mean, I called it on this podcast a while ago. I was like, okay, John Williams is going to win. They're going to give the Oscar to John Williams as like a career or achievement kind of thing. But then you had Morricone, who had, he hadn't won it all, and he had all these films, and so maybe that is what happened. That between that and like DiCaprio winning Best Actor, maybe they're like, all right, well, there we have these 2 guys who haven't won ever, and we'll just do that this year, and then next year they can stop bothering us about it. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. I just discovered a couple weeks ago, or maybe even last week, a podcast called The Score, which is I think it's an actual radio show on all classical Portland in Portland, Oregon. It's basically just he plays cuts from film soundtracks, and each episode is organized around a theme. And so he had an episode that was just devoted to the different scores that were nominated for the Oscars, and it aired before the Oscars, so I listened to it before the Oscars. And so I didn't hear, The Force Awakens was the only score that I heard in full of the nominees. The bit I heard of the Hateful Eight, I thought it was fine. The thing about John Williams and what he does and what he's so good at is, I mean, I feel like even just of the cut that this guy played, I can't remember his name, Edmund Stone. He played the end credit music from The Force Awakens, where, so basically it's a way to hear a bunch of different themes that John puts in there. And even then, I guess I just feel like John Williams' stuff has a lot more like narrative thrust, even within the cue. Whereas, a lot of these other scores and composers, and this is because this is what the director wants of them and is asking of them, there's sort of like tension building within the cue, but really it's just like, the strings are going do 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 do, and then like, oh well, we jumped up a key, and now the drums came in, and now it's more tense, but there's not like a lot of forward motion to it.
Yeah.
So that was the only one that I was like actually disappointed about. The others, the visual effects and sound editing, whatever, I didn't really.
The truth is the people that were on The Force Awakens probably worked on Ex Machina as well. So it's kind of like,
yeah, some of them, yeah.
Yeah. As far as that, I mean, I always wonder. There's a long-standing kind of bias against George Lucas, that he was celebrated at the 1977 Oscars because Star Wars was right up against Annie Hall, which it lost to. but also there has been a kind of, Lucas, he stepped down from the directors, the DGA.
Right.
Famously because of he was being fined for the credit sequence in Star Wars.
He wanted to set up the credit sequence a certain way, but Directors Guild rules said that you have to have the director's name in a certain way in the credits, and so it messed with his creative creative ideas, and so he just left. And then that meant he also then had to seek out and find other like non-union people to work on his movies, basically.
Yeah. Well, that was the argument that he goes, well, even my name's not on the first credits, but then the DGA came back and said, well, it does say Lucasfilm at the beginning. He goes, well, my name isn't George Lucasfilm, but I think that's another. I think
it should have been.
That's in the Skywalking, Dave Pollock's Skywalking book. But obviously everybody knows that George doesn't own Star Wars anymore, but it's like that has always been a thing where it's like, he's partly by his own inability to make a movie that is beloved as the first Star Wars movie. He never really was ever nominated himself for anything. Right. But then also it's like, well, okay, different owner. But then there was a lot of controversy about, Tarantino and Disney going head to head about some of the restrictions for theaters when The Hateful Eight came out, that Star Wars basically ate up all the screen. So I always wonder if it's like a little, where people kind of in the industry kind of maybe thumb their noses at Disney. It's like, you got your $1 billion, but then you're not friendly to other filmmakers. So that might, in my opinion, maybe color the voters' opinion of a Disney production. So, and it's at the end of the day, Oscars mean nothing to Star Wars movies. It's not going to. I don't think there's anybody that would ever be like, well, I was going to see The Force Awakens, but it didn't win any Oscars, so I'm not going to bother. It's like you either want to watch that kind of movie or you don't. It's not an Oscar movie.
Right.
And I think anytime that there's something that's not Star Wars that's in that same wheelhouse, they immediately get a kind of an advantage to them. I find it kind of interesting that Ex Machina beat out Fury Road.
Maybe they felt like, well, I mean, and obviously you have different sets of voters on these things. But
yes, that's true.
Sort of like, well, Fury Road can't get everything.
I mean, I love Ex Machina, but there's only one type of effect that's being used throughout that whole film, which is it's a person kind of thing. Maybe there was set extensions, I don't know, but really it's like, when Star Wars or Fury Road, when it's like a cornucopia of atmospheric effects, space and, wire replacement, all these kind of amazing things that, I think it's a harder sell when you're in a fantastical world, in a Star Wars world, in a post-apocalyptic Australia or whatever. I think it's a harder sell to the voters. I mean, famously, the John Chambers, the guy that John Goodman played in Argo. I think they won an Oscar for the Planet of the Apes makeup in 69, 70, the same year that 2001 was up for the same Oscar, because basically what happened is they thought Kubrick had trained apes in that, and Chambers was like,
yeah,
it's pretty corny now. It's like when I watch Planet of the Apes, I never think about it, but I'm sure a kid now, putting in Planet of the Apes would laugh at these gorillas in identical leather outfits.
Might not care, honestly.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, it was more of honestly, Kubrick's.
But it was clear that it's pretty clear that that's what it is.
Right. I mean, Kubrick's film is obviously much more technically advanced. I mean, it was much more of a suspension, and the Planet of the Apes was much more of a suspension of disbelief situation where you had to kind of, I don't know, it's that kind of, haven't read a lot about how the Oscars vote on these things. This is just my own kind of impressions of it, but it does kind of seem like the more fantastical your effects are, the more you're actually kind of or more realistic even, you're kind of working against yourself. It's like a balance. You have to show like, oh wow, this is amazing. How are they doing this? But then you don't have effects going constantly, because then they go, oh, these movies are just effect movies, which is a little strange. Like, oh, I don't want to give the award to the movie that basically has 2,000 effect shots in it, as opposed to Ex Machina, which probably has around 400, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, Ex Machina is a great movie, and if you haven't seen it, it's a great chance to see you know, two up and coming Star Wars actors interact in a very, very different movie. I mean, I would say it's something more akin to kind of you know, in scope, as kind of like if you enjoyed Steven Soderbergh's take on Solaris, like small sci-fi films, you know, not even Blade Runner, because Blade Runner was an art direction masterpiece, and that's not Ex Machina is a much smaller story. Other than that, the other big thing today was that they finally got around to announcing a release date for The Force Awakens on home video.
It's right around tax day, I believe.
No, actually it comes out on the 5th. So, I mean, it's close. So physical copies come out on the 5th, and that is a Blu-ray set. There will be a special metal, like a steel book, that will only be available at Best Buy. There is a version with a special cover only available at Target, which will come with 20 minutes of exclusive extras. That I was kind of hoping they wouldn't do this, and now they're doing it. Disney is, you know, parsing out extras to parsing out packaging options and extras to different retailers, obviously to kind of keep people interested in the idea of buying physical copies of things. The other thing is, though, they will be releasing it on digital on the 1st of April, which to me is so weird. Traditionally, at least as far as I've understood it, digital usually is that they have a 3-week window where movies, you know, if you go on iTunes, it's like you can buy the movie 3 weeks before you can buy that physical copy. And I was pretty much guaranteed that, and maybe this is what the people reporting this maybe did some math, and they figured, oh, well, we've heard it's coming out on the 5th. And then they walked it back 3 weeks and said, oh, well, that would be around the 15th of March.
Yeah.
So that's not, I wonder if why the short window. It kind of puts me in a quandary as a Star Wars fan about how and when I will be purchasing this. I mean, I always want, when it's a Star Wars movie, I always want to get as much extras as possible, but is this 20-minute extra going to be that big of a deal that Target has? It sounds like it's just an interview with, I mean, maybe it's screen tests of Daisy Ridley and John Boyega, or maybe a retrospective interview about the casting process, plus a featurette about the weaponry of the movie, which is always, anything that has to do with props is going to interest me, but is it going to interest me enough to go out to Target? I mean, it all depends. People go like, well, I decide whether or not I'm going to buy that based on, you know, are the extras built into the disc, or is it some extra disc glued to the packaging, which Target does a lot. You know, I've gone out and bought stuff I bought stuff at Target believing that I was going to get extras that I could only get at Target, to find that, like, oh no, they only put that extra, it's an extra disc, and they only glued it to the first 10,000 copies of something. And I'm like, oh, you know, and I live, 5 minutes from a Target. So I go down there, and it's like, I don't particularly like buying movies at Target. Because they don't, even though it's close. Amazon, it's like they'll send it to it'll be at your doorstep the day of, and I am part of one of those Best Buy things where if you buy so much you get money back, and I like to do that when I can. So I'm kind of in this quandary because, one, Star Wars is one of the few movies where I would actually want to be like, I want it the day it's available. You know, I can wait for other things. You know, I always get taunted when I have an Apple TV, and you can look right at their store, and they'll say, "Oh, you can buy it right now." And I'm like, "Oh, it's Friday night. We could watch The Martian for $15." And then it's like, "Well, I think I'm going to wait," because I I have a 3D TV, which we talked about last week, which there's not, that's another thing that irritates me. There's no 3D release on The Force Awakens currently. They basically, Iger said it's forthcoming in the future, meaning it might actually, I might be in a scenario where I want to, buy this and then I'm going to have to buy it again.
Yeah.
And it's Star Wars, and I know that I'm going to buy it again because that's the one thing that I will be a sucker, and I will buy multiple copies of it. But it's like, I'm buying, do I really want to buy it digitally to have it 4 days before thing? And I'm kind of like, that is such a short window. I'm probably not going to do that. It's like, okay, it comes out on Friday on digital and then Tuesday on physical. And the only reason I could think that they're doing this is that Disney has been very good about keeping The Force Awakens off the torrent sites. Mm-hmm. There are no what you would call good copies of The Force Awakens on torrent sites. I don't download movies like this, but I have looked at the torrent sites just to see what was available, just out of curiosity, because it's the biggest movie of 2015. You'd assume that it would be, there'd be 18 streamable versions of it from pirates. But I do know that I have noticed that when something hits iTunes, it immediately hits the torrent sites.
Yep.
It's something like, I don't know how they do it, but they download it and then they upload it to, sorry, my throat was dry. They upload it to the torrent sites and then you end up with a digital copy like the first day. So maybe they're trying to close that window.
Yeah.
People are I
think that's probably likely.
Which is kind of a new, I don't know what their techniques have been, but they've been very good about keeping stuff offline. I mean, generally the versions I've seen are that advertise are just camcorder versions. There's no fully digital copy that has leaked or anything like that. So I'm really bummed that I have to wait an extra 2 weeks for it to come out, because I'm pretty excited. It's leaving theaters and I've already kind of gotten hankering to see it that fifth time. But
yeah, I
guess I really shouldn't complain, because I honestly remember a time when it was like, you'd be driving past the video store and they'd have a little tiny ad, the Return of the Jedi comes out in a year, on VHS.
Yeah. One last time.
Exactly. And it's like, that was a big deal, because it would take 2-3 years for things to come out on video when I was a kid. So it'd be like, you'd see a movie and then you'd be like, I love Ghostbusters. And then it would be like, didn't come out on home video until 1986 or whatever, after it had already run through all the HBOs and the Cinemaxes. So, I mean, we're kind of living in a time where we're really spoiled. We can watch something in the theater and pre-order it on the way home off of our phone.
Yeah.
It just, it's like, my whole initial thing was like, I'll buy it digitally on the 15th of March, and then I'll buy a physical copy, and then I'll give the digital copy to somebody or something. But now the window's so short, it doesn't make sense for me to spend $20 on something to have it 4 days early. Yeah, I already pre-ordered it from Amazon. I'm sending it to my my brother's going to get a copy so my nieces can see it, or whenever he decides it's appropriate. And I think, as far as those editions, I probably won't buy it at Target for an extra 20 minutes. And I know you yourself, you're even questioning whether it's something you even want to buy movies.
Yeah, I mean, and I say that with staring at the box of things I ordered from the most recent Criterion sale sitting.
Oh,
well, yeah, it's just a couple things, but yeah, it's like I do need to be paring down my DVD collection, and so yeah, I've talked about how I'm not. We'll see if I buy it. I guess I will eventually, but I'm not going to rush out to buy it.
I'm curious.
I don't really care which version of The Force Awakens I get, what extras it comes with it. The only extra feature I really care about probably is, the ones about the props and the effects maybe. I'm interested in, but it's not a must-see. But maybe the John Williams one, John Williams' Seventh Symphony or whatever. I think that one I'll probably be the most interested in. but that assumes also that it's going to be a little more in depth than whatever, like that 2.5 minute thing,
right?
that got posted last week, maybe about, it's just John Williams talking about doing the film again, and it shows him conducting some of the scoring sessions, and Daisy Ridley's there, and she hears Ray's theme for the first time, and she gets all emotional. As I would hope that the featurette or whatever they're called anymore, about John Williams and the score, I would hope it's a little more in depth. I was just rewatching one that was on YouTube. Or yesterday I was watching it, but it's from The Empire Strikes Back, and about how the way he's scoring The Empire Strikes Back, and it's like 20-something minutes long, and it's really interesting because you see him scoring the thing, working at the piano to score it, and he's talking with the orchestrator about how he wants things done, and he talks a little bit about the process generally. You see him, sitting next to the was it the Moviola, whatever the editing machine is, with the editor or one of the folks, like going through frame by frame to time it out. You see him sitting with Kirshner and Lucas and Gary Kurtz and talking about the emotion in certain scenes. You see him conducting the score and running through the rehearsals and recording sessions. Like, you see all of the different stages of it. And so that's, I think, what I would be interested in seeing more of with The Force Awakens, not just like, oh yeah, it's so wonderful to revisit these themes, this glossary of themes, and adding on to them. And there are already like 2 or 3 different things where he's talked about Rey's theme and say, it's interesting because it's for a young woman, but it's not a love theme. It's more of an adventure theme. And again, footage of him conducting the recording sessions, like, yeah, that's neat, but I've seen a lot of that before. I want to see stuff that I haven't seen, and I want to learn more that we don't already know about how that score got put together.
Yeah.
So that would probably drive my decision, I think, more than anything else, is hearing what that featurette is about and what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to enjoy the more archival type extras and things like, obviously, like the Dangerous Days documentary from Blade Runner, and if people are fans of the Alien films, the Blu-ray has a 4-part. I think it's like 8 hours long. I think it's as long as the movies are, for each movie kind of going through the history. That's the kind of stuff I enjoy the most. Star Wars has been kind of in that, now that it's changed hands, I'm kind of curious. I mean, like, I was pretty disappointed in some aspects of the Blu-ray for the 6 movie Blu-ray, that they jettisoned a lot of stuff, like the documentary, The Empire of Dreams, or whatever they call it, was not included digitally, either on the Blu-ray set or on when I bought it on iTunes. And I was like, well, it's kind of like, well, why did they do that? They commissioned a 2.5 hour, documentary about those 3 films, and then they kind of just jettison it. It was like, and it's really well done. It's great for like lay people that don't necessarily understand Star Wars and they want to come in and learn about it. But which is funny, because when I got it on iTunes, they actually did include the beginning documentary from episode 1 that we watched back around Christmas, which is kind of like, it's not a very flattering documentary about Lucasfilm. It's kind of strange that they would include that, but not include, not a puff piece, but sorry, I just got a text. Sorry, that's complete. For some reason, my phone started beeping, and now I'm lost my train of thought. Oh, just the idea that I like to just give it all to me. I want all the, I eventually want all the cuts. I want to have, the 77 cut. I want to have the 81 cut. I want to have the special edition cut. I want to have anytime they changed it, I want to have it. They could either offer it to us digitally or on disc or whatever Disney says. But my fear is that these Blu-rays are going to come and the extras are going to be, like you said, they're going to be superficial. They're not real. It's going to be a lot of talking heads. It's just going to be like, and then the first time I read the script, I cried. And it's just like, it's going to be it's going to be like the 3.5 minute production thing that came out before the final trailer that I enjoyed for sure. But now that, the movie has been thing, I'd love a documentary that kind of encapsulates a lot of the stuff that showed up in the art of Star Wars, like visions of the Force, like, well, we were going to go in a different way, and be real honest about it. I mean, maybe they can't because it's only been 3 years. It's like, how far did Jesse Plemons get into being the character that John Boyega ended up playing, or the Irish actress Saoirse Ronan. She was supposedly going to be the Rey for a long time. She had tested for it. Those kind of maybe then that's just a lot of trivia that's been out there. Anyway.
No, I mean I'm with you. I have that same impulse, and I wonder, like, to some degree, it feels like they're almost holding back and they're withholding a lot of this stuff. And obviously there's a book in the works about the making of The Force Awakens, one of those J.W. Rinsler books. So we may get a lot of that information in that book. But yeah, I mean, considering, and the reason I say I go back and forth on this is that to some degree it's almost not fair to sort of expect the same amount of material immediately with this movie.
True.
As we did in the decades following
exactly.
the original trilogy, right? Like they had years and years and years to put out all of this material. But with the soundtrack too, again, to go back to that, I already, and I've been thinking this for a while. I was like, okay, great, this soundtrack's all nice and everything. I want something like those 2-disc special edition releases where we hear every cue, including stuff that was cut from the film, right? Like I want to hear everything that was recorded for this movie. I want to hear all of the music that was recorded for this movie, and we're not getting that.
Yeah,
and that's fine, right? Like we're getting, because I mean this is fine too. It's because, and in various interviews, John Williams has talked about this too. When he puts the album together for the soundtrack, right? He's sort of arranging it in a particular way. He's picking and choosing what he thinks would work. He's making sort of editorial decisions that way. And that's interesting in itself too, right? To see, okay, so John Williams is emphasizing this and not that, but you only get to sort of see those editorial decisions if you also have access to everything. And so, it would still have value, I think, as the soundtrack, the official soundtrack. But then if you also release, the double disc, okay, here's every cue that was recorded, and as well as, some alternate takes of things. I think that would be really cool. And I would want to hear some of that. And I would want to then be able to piece together what some of those editorial decisions were in putting the soundtrack together, in addition to putting the movie together. And yeah, like you were saying, and that Art of Star Wars, the Art of the Force Awakens book, I think we talked about it a little bit too, or at least I did after I got it, is, I mean, there is a lot in it. And there's a lot of, it's interesting to see the progression of the ideas and the progression of the concept art and sort of where they were headed. And, sometimes there's a clear breaking point where, you're going along, you're seeing concept art for stuff that was never, like, it's so far from what the movie was. And then there will be a note saying, like, at this point, J.J. Abrams and, Michael Arndt came back with notes from the script. And so we realized we needed this location. And, or they said, oh, show me what this would look like. And so then we had to shift what we were doing. Right. So that there is some of that out there, but it still feels like, going through it, I was like, I know there's so much more that they could be releasing that they're not. And I don't know if it's because they only picked the most interesting art or what they thought people would think was most interesting or whatever. But it's like, I feel like they could put out like another volume of it, of all this other stuff, especially when you get to the fact that, there wasn't just one design team. There were 3 design teams. They split up, costumes had their own design team, the visual folks had their own design team, the actual production. and then like props and vehicles like had their own design team. And it's like, wow, I want to, like, I'm sure all three of those departments have just piles and piles of material that they generated. It would be really cool to see a lot of that. And so I'm hopeful that in the future more of that will be forthcoming. But I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it's not fair to expect them to just automatically release all of that material, considering we've had decades to build up that material for the original trilogy. But on the other hand, right, times have changed, and the ability to put a lot of that out there has changed. Fan or audience or consumer, whichever you think is the most appropriate term, appetite for that stuff has changed too, and interest in that kind of thing has changed. And so I think it's possible that there could be, a viable market out there for them releasing even more material than they already have.
Yeah, and as far as that kind of, I got a couple points. One is that I agree. I do wonder if maybe they're being a little coy about some of it, only because if they have a thing like, here's every costume we didn't use, maybe they're kind of save money and they're going to reuse those for these movies. And that it would be something more appropriate after episode 9. And then,
that's the other issue, right?
And about
so how much of that's going to show up in Rogue One?
And about the soundtrack kind of stuff. I mean, look, the music home, purchasing music industry is like in a complete shambles right now. Nobody knows. It's like, well, we make physical copies, we have digital copies, then then people subscribe to services where they get all of it, and they don't necessarily own it. They only own it as long as they subscribe to the services. I think this is a perfect opportunity for maybe Disney to, instead of making that box set that they made recently, which was a vinyl box set and had all the originally commercially available scores. The big sale point they had was they've been remastered or taken from the original tapes. Whereas, these small press labels that do, like Light in the Attic and, Death Waltz and these kind of, these companies, they take these scores to movies, generally obscure movies, and they do like these lavish, 180 or gram things with lenticular covers and all this ephemera stuck into it. I mean, I don't understand if Disney felt that there isn't enough demand, why don't they unload this to, because they know there's enough of a demand there, they can get a boutique label, or they could create a boutique label within Disney Records and say, we're going to do these, a prestige edition. Because like you said, it's like, you want to hear all the stuff that John Williams wrote for episode 7, but we still haven't gotten proper releases of the prequel soundtracks. They did one of these weird, they did that weird one for the Phantom Menace, which was literally like the score with the dialogue removed, which they called the Ultimate Edition, and it's almost unlistenable just because the edits are so abrupt and whatnot. I don't understand why they couldn't. Well, maybe that, like I said, maybe they're waiting to do they want to do a set, but they could do the prequels. I mean, they're not doing any more prequels. Why don't they start, putting out some of this information that people want to see? I mean, there's already been, I read somewhere in passing, someone had referred to a tour that they had gone on, and in the tour they were showing clips from and I think it was a Disney related tour. It might have been somewhere in Florida or something. And on the tour they were actually showing clips from the holiday special. Huh. So it goes to show you that Disney has an interest in their legacy. I mean, one of my favorite things when I go to Disneyland is when you're tired of waiting in line for rides, you kind of go off Main Street and they have all these, like, the history of Disney, and you can see a recreation of Walt's office, and then, that kind of stuff where it's the ephemera. It's the things that you don't necessarily, it's like the old person boring stuff. It's like, maybe kids don't care how the sausage is made or whatever. I like the idea of like, well, this is a picture of what it looked like in, 59 when they were drawing up the plans for Epcot, or, that kind of stuff. There's always going to be anything related to Disney now that Star Wars is now a part of under that umbrella. There's always going to be a hunger for that. And it would behoove them to have a version that's for the kids, and then a version for the adults that get into that. And one of the big things I noticed here, thinking about this home video release, the one thing that's missing is a commentary track, which is kind of a real surprise. Because
I feel like, I wonder though, because I mean, like as I mentioned, I've recently purchased DVDs, but I haven't purchased any DVDs that were released like recently in a long time. So I don't even know, like, are commentary tracks still a thing? They're
dying off, and that's the thing. So have you made the jump to Blu-ray? Are you still a DVD guy?
No, I'm still a DVD guy. I'm going to ride out this DVD player until the end, probably.
I mean, and DVDs,
until it dies,
even though at the end of the day, the image quality is inferior to Blu-ray, I think DVD was the premium, and some people would say Laserdisc, but I don't like having to flip a disc in the middle of a movie, so I will. Yeah. But that sweet spot in the late '90s and the aughts when Blu-ray when DVD came, it was such a fantastic time to be into home video, because they treated every movie. Generally, I mean, once they got over the initial things, they would treat all these movies as being important, and there would be a commentary track, and of course there were already there's terrible commentary tracks out there. I mean, and even that being said, the Star Wars DVDs, when the Blu-rays came out, what they did is they repackaged the commentaries from the DVD editions, but then what they did is they added a thing that was a composite of press kit interviews. Some of it was Billy D. Williams was on the thing, and it's from circa. Well, that one is actually more current. It was I think it was chopped up from his interviews from the Empire of Dreams, like leftover stuff, and they would contextualize it. I mean, and that took a lot of effort, because you have to sit down and make it appropriate. But yeah, now it's like the extras are kind of, home video feels much more disposable. There's very little out there, and maybe. Well,
and I think especially with digital, both downloads and streaming. Right, if that's taking over DVD sales, people are just going to watch it on Netflix or on Amazon Prime or whatever. They're clearly not that interested in hearing the commentary track, and so it creates it takes away some of the incentives for them to invest the time in making those.
Yeah, home video's in a weird place, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, this weird window thing with from the 1st to the 5th. Is one of the aspects. The fact that there was no announcement of a 3D Blu-ray. They actually, I think Iger made a comment to that it was going to be coming in the future, and it's kind of a thing where it's like, yeah, it might or it might not, because I just heard this week that Samsung is dropping 3D support from all of its television. It's coming up, so because they're going into 4K and UHD and the curved screens and all these things, which actually are things that improve the picture quality. But 3D was kind of like, I always buy the 3D versions of stuff because I knew it's kind of few and far between. So it's like, well, I already kind of knew 3D content was hard to get a hold of necessarily. And I'll be honest, like, even though I have one, I don't use that aspect of the TV that much. Usually it's like, we'll watch a movie conventionally a few times, and then we say, oh, let's watch it in 3D. And there's very few examples where it was like, okay, this was really, I really prefer watching it in 3D. It's like, maybe, even though it's not a particularly great movie, Ridley Scott's Prometheus looks fantastic in 3D, but he filmed it in 3D. Star Wars, I think, was a post-conversion, that they did it after filming. IMAX was the first concern, and then everything else was done in-house by another group. And, even JJ was like, he's pretty soft on 3D. But I don't even know if they'll, the prequels were supposed to be released in 3D. They were doing these conversions, and I think they quit around the time they finished Revenge of the Sith, and they never did any of the original trilogy. It was a kind of a project. I think that was one of the last big projects that George had done with Lucasfilm is that they were going to do these 3D conversions, and that was going to be every year we were going to get, one of the Star Wars movies re-released, and the Phantom Menace came out, and I didn't bother to go see it.
I think a lot of people didn't bother,
and then it just kind of goes, oh. So it's kind of, it's that thing. It's like, well, are people going to buy physical? I like physical stuff. I like buying something and holding it in my hand. But being a longtime movie purchaser, I can honestly say that, most of these things I buy and I never watch the extras these days. Mainly, Star Wars would be the exception to the rule. But, yeah. I don't really care about what happened behind the scenes on Avengers Age of Ultron. But that's probably because I didn't like the movie. But, if I like a movie, if I feel like it pushed the art form forward, I want to go and delve into that and learn about it. But I can kind of see where it's like, we're at the point now where it's like, if I, I want lots of Star Wars action. If it is a lot of like, I just can't believe I'm here kind of stuff, I'm just going to get tired. It's like, it'll be watched once.
Yeah,
I really, I like the extras, like when they did the thing on Revenge of the Sith, when the original DVD came out, there was where they basically broke down an entire, everything it took to make like a 10-second sequence in Revenge of the Sith, from feeding people to getting people around sets, from building models. I mean, it's an amazing kind of window into what happens when a $100+ million movie is being made. That I just don't see a lot of that. But maybe it's just because I'm old. It's like, shut up, old man.
No, but I mean, yeah, it's. I mean, it is surprising too, I guess, as you say, like given how much sort of behind the scenes material we did get with the prequels, not necessarily books or soundtracks, but all those featurettes and all of those documentaries, and I'm looking to see what I have, right? So there was that at the beginning,
right,
from episode 1.
And there's Pixels and Puppets on episode 2.
There's Pixels and Puppets, and then there's I think it's episode 2 where it's called like Movies Aren't Released, They Escape.
Yes.
Which is it's like half an hour, I think. There's also the pre-visualization of episode 2, which I think is that's 23 minutes. There was another one that I just saw for the first time, and I'm trying to find it on my computer now, and I can't. But it's basically about building the worlds, building set design, and creating these worlds. Then that's again like half an hour or something. So we got a fair amount of these for the prequels, and so yeah, it's you would think they would want some window into the process, because if nothing else, it's sort of it's kind of a reward, right? It's to give those behind the scenes people who worked on the movie, it's to give them credit and make sure that their contributions are recognized in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little disappointing there. We don't have that, at least not yet, for The Force Awakens. And with the soundtrack, I was thinking, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about this unless you have other thoughts, which is fine. But you were saying you were tying it to album sales and certainly for classical music sales in particular, like it's pretty bad. But I wonder if there's maybe a way that they can just do like an online only release and still hire someone to write good liner notes, because that's really the issue with all of this streaming and digital downloads and music now, is you don't have any good liner notes, and so you don't have a lot of good credits for who's performing on tracks and producing and writing these things. And for the Star Wars soundtracks, it would be more along the lines of like, okay, well, here's why this cut was made. Here's what this cue refers to in the film. So you kind of have a sense of what you're listening to. But so there's a rapper named Lil B, who our listeners may or may not be familiar with. Really, the most pertinent part of Lil B's story is that he he sort of initially made his name back in the MySpace era by creating like a ton of different MySpace pages and just like dropping 30 or 40 tracks, in like a day. He would record all these things and then just dump them on the internet. And he's still doing it. So I can't remember if it was last year or 2014. He had an album called Thugged Out, Pissed Off. And it's like 60 something tracks. It's like almost 4 hours long, I think. Right. So it's basically impossible to listen to in one sitting.
Okay.
But he just like, all right, here you go. Here's 60 some songs. Just all at once. Here's 3+ hours of music all at once. So, and that I think got, so I'm looking here. It got like 20,000 or so official downloads on the website where it was released. Who knows how many people actually downloaded it on other sites via other forms. But 20,000 of that's certainly respectable for like classical music. And so now I'm looking at at least this is the Wikipedia page anyway for this Force Awakens soundtrack. It says the soundtrack debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 chart for the week ending November 26, 2015, with 100,000 equivalent album units, of which 94,000 were pure album sales. This marks the highest debut for a score-only soundtrack since 1999, with Phantom Menace replaced it at number 3. Right, so especially for these Star Wars soundtracks, like there's an audience out there. There are people who are willing to download them. I would think at least. You're not going to get 94,000 people downloading. The equivalent of 2 discs, right? You don't have to release 4 hours worth of music. You can release, but the full score, which is going to be closer to, just a little less than 2 hours.
Right.
If they get even half of that, if they get a quarter of that, like that's for a classical album, like that would be amazing. And I'm pretty sure you could get that. I think you could probably get, 20,000, 25,000 downloads of the equivalent of a double disc, release of all of the music. And so I think there's probably a way for them to do that without having to worry about like, well, we're going to spend all this time printing liner notes and printing the physical copies and printing the things like, maybe you can do that for, again, the John Williams put together soundtrack, official soundtrack, but then, maybe follow it up later on with this, 20, 30, 40 track. Well, I guess the soundtrack itself is 23 tracks. So, 40 tracks of music, 50 tracks of music, that's not unheard of, especially because those tracks are only going to be a couple minutes long. So I think it's possible, whether they think it, I don't know how much of it's an economic decision and like you were saying, how much of it's sort of let's hold back for now because we have so many of these other projects going on. We don't want to sort of reveal too much. And, maybe some of this music that got cut from The Force Awakens, I don't think it'll get reused anywhere else, but, let's respect John Williams' decision, at least at this point, and then later on follow up and check with him and be like, hey, can we release the full thing?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a good indicator that maybe he's going to come back for episode 8 and they're just kind of like holding
they
back.
still haven't announced that. I'm waiting for that announcement.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weird, there was some question getting back to casting or whatever. There's this thing that Peter Mayhew has been teasing for weeks on his Twitter page about, he's been showing pictures of his original script or whatever. And they're like, oh, it's going to be connected to a big announcement. I almost wonder if, actually the minute I started saying this to you, I just think I realized what the big announcement is. But initially they thought it was going to be like, oh, is it going to be that he's retiring the role? But then I've heard he's actually been signed already. And that Finnish guy is going to come in and do the same kind of stuff he did in the thing. Actually, I think I answered my own question. I bet you anything he's going to auction off that script. That's why he's showing it.
Possibly.
Maybe for charity, maybe for himself. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So now I think I answered my own.
I was kind of wondering if he was going to then slip, an innocuous page from episode 8 in there.
Oh, I don't.
Right, it's like disguised as, and that would be like the announcement. Surprise! I'm working on episode 8 or whatever. But
I see. Yeah.
But I think you're probably closer to.
It's so funny. The minute I said it, I was like, he's probably gonna. It was like, why would he be showing the script if he had an announcement he was coming back for 8 or he wasn't? And I realized, no, he's showing the script because that's what he's gonna try to sell to somebody. And I'm like, oh. But yeah, I mean, I agree with this. I think it's just a matter of Disney doesn't quite know how to market those kind of things that might have, 90,000 or whatever for a soundtrack release in 2015, 2016. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, I went out and bought, I have Apple Music, so I can listen to the Force Awakens soundtrack on my phone whenever I want. I can download it to my phone for if I didn't want to use my data, but I still bought a physical copy, and that's only because, because it's fun and I like buying Star Wars stuff, and for a guy like me, it's like there's a limited amount. I'm not going to buy those smash 'em ups or whatever they call those weird deformed toys. So it's like, soundtracks and magazines. Although I did finally find the second series of the Black Series, the 6-inch. I got my Phasma, which I talked about, and then I finally Amazon got the 6-inch FN 2187. Finn with the blood smear on his helmet, the thing. So I've got that. I'll be getting that next week. So I really like those Black Series figures. I have to keep telling myself not to buy them because I'll go out and see one at Target and I'm like, oh, this Kylo Ren's pretty nice. I'm like, where am I going to put these?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of a weird time. I really kind of hope we don't ever get to the point where, this changes so much where the old fans just are like, I don't even, I can't get the, stuff the way I liked it. It's like you go to these retailers and they're all fighting for shelf space at Best Buy now. It's like every time you go to Best Buy, their movie section is shrunk down to nothing. I mean, you couldn't possibly even think about buying a catalog title of like an obscure, I buy those, was it Shriek Factory or whatever, they
Shout Factory?
They're when they do
it's like a play on Shout Factory?
Yeah, when they do some of it's Shout Factory and I'm holding this Mad Max and what do they call this one? Scream something or rather, which Scream Factory is their genre film ghetto or whatever. It's like they're the ones that do like the John Carpenters and the obscure 80s horror movies. I mean, you can't in Seattle. There's like one store you could, if you want to physically go in and buy a copy of a movie. It's like Best Buy doesn't carry that stuff. Although they did finally get Escape from New York, but that's been out for a year and a half.
Yeah,
it's a weird time it's a weird time for retail. I think it's existing in that physical world and in that warehouse world. That being said, actually, one of the only other pieces of news, except some of the filming for Episode 8 stuff, is that John Boyega has now decided he's mad that Star Wars Battlefront doesn't have an offline first-person mode. And it's like, John, where were you last summer?
He's clearly just getting to it.
I feel bad for him because that is the realization that a lot of fans of video games and Star Wars video games found out quickly. I don't think it's one of those situations that DICE, the company that made it, could whip up something in an afternoon. So I don't think he's gonna. I think if you saw the Twitter exchange, I think it was an overture for John to be able to come over to Stockholm and spend a day with them, which that's fine. They are coming out finally with some of the DLC stuff that they've been teasing since November, but it's pretty slim pickings. I mean, wow, you can play as Nine Numb or Greedo, which that's fine. Yeah. It's fun. That's not in the maps. They're kind of just adjustments of pre-existing planets. I don't know. I don't know if the Cloud City map is actually coming out. I will say this, and I've said it before, I've come to appreciate that game a lot more than my initial stuff because it does fall within that realm of you can play it for 20 minutes and then shut it off and then go on with your day. It's not something where you're overly concerned with like, I need to unlock this scope for my gun, and you spend which the game that it's most similar to, the Battlefield series, which is made by the same company. I have been playing that again, and I was like realizing, gosh, this game is really hard if you don't remember the techniques.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to understand why Battlefront was not like Battlefield. But
yeah,
I don't think John's going to get his first person. Maybe he'll get a special one just for him.
Well, he basically just wanted like an offline mode, right?
Right. And there are kind of like these. His complaint to DICE, they pointed out that there are these things called missions, and you can go play missions where you basically, you stand in the map and then you fight off hordes of Imperials or rebels until you've done it 20 times, and then you win. And he had complained, said, I want more of a narrative. So I don't think he's going to get what he's wanting, but I understand where he's coming from. I think that was kind of short-sighted, but that's the way the game industry is. It's some franchises, they devalue the single person story for the online stuff, because that's where those companies make that money. Those DLCs, they make all their money on those DLCs. So I can see why they parse it out, much like how they parse out these extras on the Blu-rays. Do you want to get into some Rebels?
Yeah, let's do some Rebels.
Let's do some Rebels.
Chat.
So if you guys aren't watching Rebels, this is where you can go get a drink.
Yeah. So since we last talked about Rebels, they've had 2 episodes: the Honorable Ones and Shroud of Darkness. The Honorable Ones is where you had Zeb and Agent Callus, who of course are bitter enemies. They were trapped together on one of the moons of Geonosis. It was dark. It was getting cold. They had to work together and cooperate to survive. And in the process, they learned a little bit more about each other. And then Shroud of Darkness is the one that just aired yesterday, today. This is where, God, those Inquisitors, they're just always around, aren't they?
The in medias res
the Inquisitors that we haven't seen for 5 episodes, 6 episodes.
Exactly.
They're always on Kanan and Ezra's tail. Maybe it's because that while Kanan and Ezra are in the middle of fighting the Inquisitors, they keep talking about their secret base, and how they're trying to find secret bases. So Kanan, Ezra, and Ahsoka go to the Jedi Temple on Lothal to try to find answers. Yoda, the spirit of Yoda, is there, and creates visions to try to send messages to the 3 of them, provide lessons for them, whatever. And then the Inquisitors show up and I guess destroy it. It's kind of left ambiguous what happens at the end, but I think the implication is that the temple is falling apart. And
did you miss the end of that episode? Because there was an ending at the end that kind of explains what they're doing with it.
Well, so maybe I did. I don't know.
Did you see Vader? Did you see Vader?
Oh yeah, Vader was there.
Yeah.
So they didn't. Yeah, they didn't.
They captured it for the Empire.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I just forgot about that.
Yeah, I would say that this is these 2 episodes are prime examples of, tropes that have been used in many different type of, genre. Your Buffys, your Star Treks, to a lesser extent Supernatural. I don't know, I've never seen Supernatural. But it's very, these shows, when they get to a certain point, that's when they start to recycle these frameworks where, the Honorable Ones is very, very much like, what was that movie? Was it Sidney Poitier and Curtis?
In the Heat of the Night? No.
What's Jamie Lee Curtis's father?
Tony
Curtis. I dated Marilyn Monroe. She was beautiful. That idea of 2 enemies. I think the Defiant Ones, they're handcuffed. They're escaped prisoners are handcuffed. It's a little different. there's actually another trope that's very similar. I think it riffs off of the idea that two disparate enemies.
We're not so different.
Yeah, it's I'm sure it's fun for kids to watch that, but it's like I know it's like, yeah, I remember this is almost exactly the same episode as Deep Space Nine when Quark and Odo were trapped on a frozen planet and they had to keep warm, and it was just like, I knew exactly where it was going, spoiler alert, Callus, we find that Callus is actually at the end of the day an honorable man. They work together. I mean, Zeb,
not every, right. It's sort of the idea that they were driving home, at least in Lost Stars and in some of the books, that, not everyone who works for the Empire is evil. That, you can still sort of respect and maybe even root for people who work for the Empire.
Yeah, it's this kind of weird thing where, like, Star Wars now is kind of opening up this kind of like, why do we always dehumanize the Empire in our stuff?
Yeah,
we could sell
with, like, I think it was just a couple weeks ago, Donald Gleason was like, yeah, no, I based my performance kind of on Hitler.
Yeah, it's that kind of idea.
Like, no, yeah, he's a space Nazi, right? We're space Nazis.
Right. I mean, to me, the Empire, like, when I was a kid and I was like, and my grandmother, who I lived with when I was going to college, and like that was like the kind of the second birth of Star Wars, and I was still there when the special editions came out, and I was trying to explain to her, an 80-year-old woman, like, what Star Wars, because she'd never seen it. And I was like, well, the Emperor, they're space Nazis. And it was like, she understood that completely. I mean, she lived through World War II, and it made perfect sense. Now it's a weird kind of gray area where it's like, we have, there's Darth Vader, supposed to be the scariest guy, but we have 5-6 seasons of a Clone Wars cartoon where people love him. So it's like this kind of like, I understand where they're going, but it's kind of hard to show that, like, I don't really want to find out that, at the end of the day, Rommel was a really nice guy. Yes, Rommel was he didn't like Nazis.
He's a flawed and tragic character.
Yeah, it was like,
that's like the code they use.
And I'm definitely no World War II historian, but as far as I understand, Rommel was not a Nazi per se, but he was a German, but that still doesn't mean that he didn't take up arms and try to, take over the world.
Right. It's like with the concentration camp guards that they keep finding who are like 97 years old or whatever, and prosecuting, and people are like, he's 97 years old, whatever, he was just a guard, he was like, yeah, no, he still was a guard at a concentration camp, like, he still was involved in evil. Yeah. So, like, you can't, I think what we're talking about here essentially is that they're trying to have it both ways, right? They're trying to make these movies, at least, that, yeah, this is about good and evil, right? This is about, right? It's pretty clear, like, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And then in their other media, they're like, oh, but maybe the bad guys aren't as bad as you thought. It's like, but like, basically the question then becomes, does that cheapen, or does that somehow lessen the impact of that kind of like good versus evil, like good guys versus bad guys aspect of the movies, or does it then make it, enjoyable for all ages, where, the little kids can have their clear good versus evil, and then the older kids and the young adults and the adults can have their, like, oh no, I'm learning a lot about Tarkin's military tactics, and it's actually quite fascinating. And the reason for the Tarkin doctrine is actually, it's because of he was never respected by the people who grew up on Coruscant. And you're like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah, it's this kind of, it's like this weird connection of trying to tell an overall narrative of a story mixed with marketing. And it becomes like this, it gives off weird messages, and maybe kids, I mean, I tend to err towards giving people credit for their intelligence. Like I think kids generally are a lot brighter than we give them credit for when they're watching cartoons. But I don't know if they're mature enough to understand the subtleties of, of these stories. Right. I mean, the Empire, they're basically genocidal maniacs all the way up into this new movie. And then, I guess I'm just kind of repeating what you said, but it's hard because you look, it's like, well, okay, at the end of the episode, which, I mean, to be honestly, plot wise is not really worth getting into the minutia of it. It's they work together to get things. And Zeb actually decides to, as a sign of respect, to not capture Callus and return him to the rebels. So it's a kind of like he's an honorable thing. And, it kind of reminds me, is like he's become... Zeb is almost like, what's that guy from Farscape? Dargo?
Yeah.
And it's like, he's kind of the Dargo character. It's like, he's just like the...
Well, right down to like the gun that also turns into a melee weapon or whatever.
And it's like, he's like, and Callus is not, he's not Scorpius. He's who is the guy who is, he's...
Crace.
Crace.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I guess, and really, like I said, it's been done already, and it's been done better. So you're not really getting anything fresh from Star Wars. I know it's just like that weird thing where it's like I understand, and at the end, okay, my point was, and at the end, so Callus goes back to the Empire, and like the kind of his lesson learned is that, like, he talks to like the guy that looks like Walt Disney or whatever.
Yeah.
What's his name?
I don't even remember.
I keep thinking, what's that? What's the character from the Venture Brothers that this Walt Disney, but they don't say it.
Roy Brisby.
Brisby. Early on. He looks like that weird spider version of Mr. Brisby from the Venture Brothers. And he goes, hey, how, he's like, so how's it going? I'm fine. And they just go off to I've got a sad little room, and I bet you the rebels, they're having s'mores, and they're all like talking about their feelings. It was kind of like a weird, I mean, I understand that this is a kid's show, and they don't want to hammer kids over with concepts they may not understand. But like I said, I think that kids are more sophisticated than we think. And it's just kind of like, it's like, that's what his lesson is. I don't have any friends. Being a space Nazi is hard. It's a weird kind of thing. And I understand that in real life, and maybe that's the point there. It's just maybe the lesson that they're trying to say is like, well, if you are diametrically opposed to somebody's philosophy, it might help you in the long run to realize that they are
understand
their humanity and their motivations. And okay, that makes perfect sense when you're like dealing with some issues. Right. But then there's other ones where it's
the Vietnam War. I don't know.
Yeah. You can't really I feel like you get into weird territory when they're kind of like, oh, well, these guys are space Nazis, but they had feelings too.
Yeah. Oh, South Carolina was just worried about taxes. That's why they tried to secede.
Yeah. I mean, these are nuanced conversations that I don't, if my nieces were watching this, I don't want to have this conversation with a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
About nuance. So but that's my point. I think my opinion about this has been, I think I've hammered away about this for months, is that I'm really uncomfortable at this humanizing aspect of the Empire. I mean, the First Order is kind of a different. I like how they were able to kind of sidestep it in the fact that they the stormtroopers are basically indoctrinated at a young age, and they showed that the fact that people can make a moral decision to step away from this, how Finn was just decided, this is horrible, I can't do this, and he finds a way to escape. I mean, I think that's a great way to do it, a way to kind of sidestep this greater issue. But if all of a sudden it's like, I don't know my point. I don't really know how to go from there, but like I said, I've always been uncomfortable with having to sympathize with space Nazis. And
Yep.
And
I mean, the other thing too is, so both of these episodes, and we'll say this to transition to Shroud of Darkness, but I mean, both of these episodes, the way they're structured, I think has been a little weird, right? Because both of these episodes are essentially kind of talky episodes, right? The Honorable Ones is about these two people sitting and just kind of talking out their problems or talking about themselves, I guess, and their own personal conflict. And then Shroud of Darkness is, these three characters interacting with their own Force visions and just kind of sitting around and talking. So to sort of like counteract that, I guess, there's this like flurry of activity in the first minute or two of each episode. But, to try to keep it interesting and to try to make it seem like an action show. Right. So the Honorable One starts out. I still am not totally sure what is happening at the beginning of the Honorable Ones, like why they are at Geonosis, because they're cramming it with all this action to make up for the rest of the fact that the rest of the episode is talky. But then they also need to cram in all this exposition about like why they are where they are.
Right.
And like why they're engaged in all of that heavy action. And so, like with Shroud of Darkness, as I said, it opens with Kanan and Ezra in this lightsaber duel with the two Inquisitors, seventh sister and fifth brother. But at the same time, they're like talking to each other about the fact that they're looking for a secret base. I guess the fact that they found us means that this isn't a good place for a secret base. Where's our backup? Chopper's in charge of, flying the thing, right? There's like all of this thing that they're like carrying on this conversation in the middle of a lightsaber duel, and it's distracting. It's super distracting. And it's like not even very like effective dialogue. And I think the Honorable Ones is almost even worse in that regard, because they're flying around, they're being chased by the Empire and the Ghosts. But like they're talking about, this is our mission to Geonosis, but I don't think they ever really say what it is. Like right. You're just expected, like, they're being chased by the Empire and they're on Geonosis for some reason. Just and now by some quirk of fact, like they end up, Zeb and Callus end up in a escape pod together. Like who cares why they how they got that way? It just makes it seem like they're trying to cram too much material into a 22-minute show.
Exactly.
Because then you're just like, wait, what's happening? Like it's hard to figure out what exactly you're supposed to be paying attention to for the first couple of minutes, and then it settles in, and you're like, oh, okay, this is just an episode where Zeb and Callus talk about their feelings, or okay, this is just an episode where Ezra like actually sees Yoda and Kanan talks about how he's trying to protect Ezra. Like, okay, I get what this episode is about, but the beginning of it just like the structure of it is kind of imbalanced.
Yeah,
in terms of like the ratio, like when they have action and when they just have dialogue.
I mean, I think it's the problem where it's almost like we were talking before we started recording about. I almost wish they would invert the way that they treat this show with the way that they treat the comic books, because the comic books. And we're not going to talk about comic books at all this week, but I will say this, that they tend to, the whole function of the comic book is really literally to get you to buy the next comic book. It's like they parse out the story so little that you are required. It's like, and I spent $4 and I feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, there wasn't a lot of story in this issue. And the problem with Rebels is that they try to almost create a self-contained episode with, thin tendrils connecting each thing. They don't have I think they should almost go to the Clone Wars idea of having arcs.
Yeah.
Clear arcs.
I think they're trying to, but like they're breaking them up, like this thing with the Inquisitors, like we were saying, how Kanan's like, those Inquisitors are always at our backs. It's like, really? We haven't seen them for over a month.
Exactly.
Like, where were these Inquisitors, where were these Inquisitors when you were at Geonosis? Where were these Inquisitors when, you were in the call when you
why couldn't, if they followed them from this planet, how come they couldn't have found them where they were sitting when they met up with the ghost?
Right.
You know, it's
why didn't they, or, you know, even when they were completely out of fuel and just basically limping along, why didn't they encounter the Inquisitors there? If the Inquisitors just find them all the time.
Yeah, and the other problem is that, of course, one of the subplots is they decide, oh well, we have to talk to Yoda. Now, I'm sorry, did they already establish? Was that last season that they had established they could communicate with Yoda?
Yeah, it was when it was the last time they were at this particular thing.
When he got his lightsaber, is that when
they talked to him? You didn't see Yoda, but you just heard his voice, and it wasn't identified as Yoda.
Okay.
But it was Yoda's voice.
Although, I mean, it's a big coup. They actually got Frank Oz to come in and do this voice.
I know.
So they go to my point was they go back to Lothal, which
right.
You know, considering we make
I was thinking about it. I was like, well, I guess they know that there is a temple there.
Yeah, it's just, but it's the idea that they're on the run and they keep going back to this planet that they've had. You know,
that's been blockaded, but apparently not that well. Yeah. I guess
the story keeps happening on this planet, and it's like, oh my God, there's 8 billion planets in this show. I mean, even back to that IO9 article where they show the primer for people, or the style guide for people that write Star Wars from 94, where they say, don't just set everything on a desert planet, which it's so funny because all the movies seem to violate their own style guide. But, yeah, it's just, they find back to the same Jedi temple, and there's like this extremely long sequence where they lift.
Oh, but now there's a different door.
Oh yeah, and they turned it into the floating cocoon from the Venture Brothers. All of a sudden, they're lifting it out of the sky, practically lifting it out of the sky to bring the door out.
It's a very similar shape.
It's like, every time I was looking at it, I was like, are you seeing what I think I'm seeing? Yes, this is the time we will get into that Jedi temple and talk to Yoda, that little freak. Just they get in there, and then there's like, it becomes like this 3-piece thing where, Ezra is talking to Yoda, and, what's her face is having her vision. Ahsoka is having her vision, and then Kanan goes in and has a dream sequence from the waiting room in the Matrix or something.
Yeah,
it looks almost exactly like the room that Morpheus teaches Neo how to do kung fu.
Yeah, I mean it's a martial arts training dojo basically, like that, but in a generic looking place.
And he fights a faceless temple guard.
Mm-hmm.
That and it turns out that this was his Jedi trial, and which is a little something they've always kind of been coy about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they refer to. I mean, obviously, in the Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan's trial, quote unquote, was him beating Darth Maul.
Yeah.
And then in the Tarkovsky, the Genndy Tarkovsky Clone Wars, Anakin, he goes through some kind of Jedi trial that involves some kind of almost dreamlike sequence too. I don't know if they do I don't know if they do the trials in the Clone Wars or not. I assume they do. But it's this kind of thing where I kind of wish they would almost never explain how you finally finish your training, because they do that ridiculous thing where they literally knight the person.
Yeah,
with a lightsaber.
I mean, I would assume that the Jedi trial is almost like personalized. It's whatever the Jedi in question sort of needs, like, or whatever trial is appropriate for them. So in this case, for Kanan, it was a combination of both, like his fighting, but also, making sure that he understood basically what his responsibilities were with Ezra, right? It was as much mental as physical.
So they're personalized.
Whereas say with like Obi-Wan, it was pretty much all physical.
Well, it's kind of funny because for being like the idea that there's that subplot, and I guess it's in Ezra's part of his little thing, that in order to defeat them, he must not fight or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, it kind of is this weird thing where they're showing, Kanan is performing his trial by fighting what turns out to be, I guess, a vision or something. It's not, there's not actually somebody there. At least that's what they say on I watched the whatever they call it, the declassified or whatever, the thing they do after the episode.
Yeah,
and
Rebels Recon.
I think Pablo Hidalgo said, no, it's supposed to be a dream, or Dave Filoni, I mean.
Yeah. Right. It's a Force figure.
He's not actually fighting, and it turns out that the person he was fighting is the guy that became the Inquisitor.
Yep.
Which is weird.
Yep.
So, and I guess
it's sort of it's like a twist, I guess.
And my problem is it's like, okay, so is the trial a fighting by single combat thing, or is it an emotional thing? It almost becomes like this idea, well, was Luke, did he go in the cave? Was that Yoda's trying to say, like, you know, we're accelerating Luke's training because he's already like 23 years old, and like, let's send him into the cave. He'll go through the trial. If he can do this, then he's a Jedi Knight, and he is ready. And he fails, of course, because he takes his weapons. I mean, he'd already like Yoda had already figured out, like, oh, he failed already. He's taken his saber with him. So it's like this weird thing. It's like, well, Kanan has to fight to become a Jedi. And does that mean Luke had to not fight to become a Jedi? I mean, I guess it goes within your realm of, you know, a personalized trial, the idea that, you know, the impetuous youth who wants to fight rather than learn, versus Kanan, who doesn't necessarily want to fight.
Right.
But he actually seems to be, you know, his lightsaber is never at the ready. He has to put it back together every time he wants to use it, which I always find out I have a problem with, because it's like, if it were me, I would always lose that top part. You know what I mean? It'd be like the shield, the refractor or whatever. I'd be like, god damn it. I'd be walking through around the ship. Have you see it? Do you see it? Do you see it? Oh, there it is.
Hang on. Time out.
Oh, I missed I didn't thread it right the first time or something. But, I guess it maybe, now that I say it, it does actually add a little bit more intrigue to it. I'm a little disappointed that, you know, we've had Ahsoka back these times, and it just seems like she never has a lot to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's... And in that Rebels Recon, Filoni talked a little bit about, like, oh, you know, he's carrying forward kind of the story that they had laid out for Ahsoka back when they were working on Clone Wars. And so he's like, so it's, you know, it's good to have Ahsoka, and in this episode, there's a holocron image of Anakin talking, and so they got the voice actor who did Anakin from Clone Wars. So he's like, you know, it's not just good to like bring back stuff from Clone Wars, but just to, you know, continue to go through the story of this character who people like a lot. But then he said something like, and, you know, as we get closer to the end, so, you know, they're advancing her story. She has something to do in the sense that, like, they needed her to figure out who Darth Vader was, right?
Right.
And so that's sort of what she does in this episode. That's kind of all she does in this episode.
Yeah.
So they're like, all right, so why not? Because otherwise I'm not sure why she's there, right? But that's sort of her utility in this episode.
Yeah, I mean,
like, we need to provide a space somewhere in the season before the finale for her to figure out who Darth Vader is. So let's bring her to the Jedi Temple with Kanan and Ezra.
Well, and also there's that weird exchange when they start to lift up the floating cocoon, where she demurs and goes, "Oh, I'm not a Jedi."
Right.
And it's like, well, you're still a light orientated Force user. Shouldn't you be able to, you know, if you're not part of the team, then why did you even go inside? You know?
Well, and I thought it was weird too, because from the previous episode where they went to that temple, like, I thought, like, it was all about how the master and the apprentice have to do stuff together. So I was like, well, then if that's the case, then she shouldn't have been able to help them get in anyway. It would have had to have been. But I think they just, like, I'm sure it was like, hey, for our young audience of Rebels who maybe hasn't seen all of the Clone Wars, or anyone who's watching Rebels who hasn't seen all the Clone Wars, we just need to reiterate who this character is.
Right.
So we'll just do that in this way, and it's kind of a clunky way, but like I think it was mostly just to like, all right, we just need to make sure everyone is on the same page with who this character is.
Yeah, I'm holding out hope that in the what is it, 3 episodes or 4 episodes left of this season. I think it's 18, 19, and 20.
No episode next week.
I think there's 3 episodes left because I think this was the 17th. I don't know. I don't have the data in front of me, but I've seen some teasers, and we all know that Maul is coming back at some point. Vader has shown up again, so we know that he's probably going to be a factor in this end. And I'm kind of hoping that these next 3 episodes. I saw a clip, like a tease, that involved Ezra kind of tapping into the dark side and doing some choking. So I mean, it'll be interesting. We're either going to end. The season's either going to end with a Maul Vader showdown, or maybe an Ahsoka Vader showdown.
I think they have. I mean, they've been building to this confrontation between Ahsoka and Vader. At some point they have to get those together.
And maybe that's why Maul's coming back, so they can kill off Ahsoka without having Vader having done it. I don't know.
Anakin do it.
Yeah, it's kind of.
The other connection is of course, in that season 2 preview, or the video for the trailer, I guess, for the second half of the season, you saw Ezra using one of those crossguard lightsabers,
right?
And of course, one of the last things I think Yoda says to Ezra in this episode is, go to Malachor. And so he asks Kanan and Ezra, like, I'm supposed to find someone named Malachor. And they go, oh, Malachor is not a person, it's a place. And he goes, huh? So if you look up Malachor, there may be non-canon references to it now, but in terms of canon references to it, it shows up in the visual dictionary, which Pablo Hidalgo wrote most of, I think. And so there was like the purge of Malachor or something happened 1,000 years prior to the Force Awakens, and the only reason that's relevant is because that crossguard lightsaber that Kylo Ren uses is like a Malachor design, or it dates back to that purge of Malachor or whatever.
I see.
And so I assume that's where. There's going to be either the next episode or one of the last episodes. They'll go to Malachor, and Ezra will, find this crossguard lightsaber or put one together or something, and so that they're going to sort of tie those together that way. But so that's something to keep an eye out for, I guess, in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's had appearances in the Knights of the Old Republic video game, and
the planet did, yeah,
and then the Sith. Oh, yeah, it was mentioned, and then it didn't actually wasn't shown until the sequel to it that it's a game I've never played. I mean, that's all not, it's kind of like they brought it into the canon in a Clone Wars episode, but it's one of those things where it's not at least in my mind, it wasn't a well-known location in the Star Wars thing. So it'll be interesting to see where they take it. I mean, I can be pretty critical of the show, but it generally has there's enough stuff in each episode to keep it somewhat interesting, even with my discomfort with some of the tones and
yeah. I mean, I thought Shroud of Darkness worked a lot better than the Honorable Ones.
I would agree,
except Yoda,
the character, the way he looked, or something.
The character design.
Okay.
So they went back to some Ralph McQuarrie or Joe Johnston design of Yoda, and it looks so bad. Like, it doesn't even look bad, it just looks off model, right? Because it's one of those weird funky things where he looks more like a person's head, right? So
yeah,
so the Yoda, the final design for Yoda
kind of looks like
was created, right? He was created by the model maker was, or whatever you call it, was Stuart Freeborn.
Yeah.
And so the face and the structure was based a little bit on Stuart Freeborn, and it's like they made this Yoda look too human. And it like, I know what they're doing, right? They're trying to, again, bring back those old designs, but it just, in this context, it just makes it look like off model, right? Like when you watch any animated show, like the first season of the show compared to, season, if it lasts that long, 5 or 6 or something, right? The character designs are slightly different. They like streamline them and everything. The Simpsons and King of the Hill come to mind, certainly, where like then later on, the Simpsons would do this where, that first season they had, just background characters and like people who worked with Homer at the power plant or whatever. They were all kind of like weird looking.
Right.
And then so when one of them would randomly show up in like season 7, it just looks so out of place. And that's kind of how I felt about this Yoda in this episode. Like, it just looked out of place. It looked so off model, and it was like, oh, it distracted me.
I honestly kind of,
anytime he would talk, I would be like, oh my god, get it off the screen.
I actually felt a little bit like that about the Anakin.
Yeah, the Anakin I thought was.
Well,
too.
he's wearing a chest plate with the Jedi symbol on it. It's like I almost felt like I was looking at a toy catalog.
Yeah, and I don't know whether I don't know how much of that is like they purposeful in the sense of like, okay, they're trying to show Anakin in a transitional point of his life where he's older than he was in episode 1, but younger than he was in episode 2. And younger than he was in the Clone Wars. So he looks slightly different. Or how much of it and the Yoda thing were like, transitioning from the look of the Clone Wars show to the look of Rebels. And, you have a little more curves, you have softer lines. And so it just ends up looking, it ends up looking off model.
Yeah, I mean, it was that kind of disorientation. It was almost the same way the first time I watched the Clone Wars, like when the cartoon or the TV movie, and then I would immediately just cringe at the characterizations of Obi-Wan and Anakin. I'm like, oh, geez, I hate his nose, and I hate it was that kind of thing. It's like, and instead of introducing it in a movie that was a 90-minute movie, you're introducing it in a 22-minute episode where it's only going to get like a tiny window of recognition, and it just the whole time it's just awkward. It's just, I don't know. I really like the way that they kind of matured Ahsoka up from the Clone Wars, and she looks more, I like she doesn't have that like weird like smirk on her face that she did in some of the early Clone Wars things.
Yeah.
Where when she would run, she'd make this weird face, and she's supposed to be looking like she's exerting herself, but she looks a little constipated. Yeah. I mean, I think
that just the animation got better.
Exactly. I mean, I think they even concede that themselves.
Yeah. But and with her, like transitioning her from Clone Wars to Rebels and aging her up, like I think they did a great job with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Yoda and Anakin look off model.
But anyway, I'm still optimistic about the end of the season. There's going to be some good stuff going on. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
So I think it's about time to wrap up.
All right.
We've covered a lot of stuff. We've talked about 8 different franchises today, it feels like. Maybe you have stuff you want to say to us. Best way to do that is to, you could follow us on Twitter at talkingbirdcast. That is, I'd love some followers. I'm to the point where I don't even know. Should I buy followers?
Follow us. No, don't buy followers.
I'm just kidding. I don't need a bunch of spam followers. We are, you can always, one of the great things is you can get late night stupid comments from Robert, because that's when I'm up late at night talking about Star Wars for no reason.
Both of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes.
You can, and sometimes we even differentiate, but when we're hive mind, it's almost like we don't need to.
Yeah.
You can email us at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. You could write us a really nice review on iTunes.
Please do.
We're not really doing a lot with the Tumblr right now, and I've kind of abandoned the Facebook thing. So we are.
But they're there.
We are there. So we are Talking
find
Bird.
Us. We are there.
Talking Bird Star Wars at tumblr.com. I forget where you could just put Talking Bird Podcast, I think, and it'll show up. on Facebook, but I don't know why you would. I'm sorry, I'm underselling it.
Yeah.
I got my back up about it. Facebook is a hard nut to crack. To get
Facebook is a harsh mistress.
It is. I think that's all. Do you have anything that you need to add? Do you have any plugs, people that we need to watch out for? Yeah, it's kind of not a lot of plugs this week. Just go watch some Rebels, read some comic books, watch that Ghostbusters trailer, and tell me what you think about it. Because I'm willing to hear your opinions of non-Star Wars stuff. I mean, we did talk about Ghostbusters a long time. I'd like to hear your take on your opinions. You don't necessarily have to talk about our opinions. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. And for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I'm still John Llewellyn.
And I thank you for listening, and may the Force be with you.